everybody, welcome to today's lesson. I'm Fedorskide from Automotive Technology Department. Today I will present Chapter 2, Clutch System. This is my Week 2 Part 1 video. In this video, I will try to cover different parts about clutch system. Before we proceed to the contents, I want to show you the objectives. At the end of this chapter, the student should be able to describe the various clutch components and their function. You must explain the operation of the clutch, list the different types of clutch linkage, identify the most common problem that occurs within the clutch system, explain how to perform basic clutch maintenance, and at the end, you must explain or you must demonstrate the basic of servicing clutch system. So to cope up this clutch system objectives, we must have study these contents. So the first content will be manual clutch overview, and the next will be manual clutch construction and operation for specifically light duty vehicle, clutch system problem diagnosis and tests, clutch system servicing, adjusting, it includes the servicing includes adjusting the clutch pedal free play, leading the hydraulic clutch system, overhauling the clutch system, and at the end we will try to see the clutch system for heavy duty vehicle in comparison with light duty vehicle clutch system. When you see the manual clutch overview, as you observe in the right side of the picture, clutch is the first drivetrain component which is powered by the engine crankshaft, or it gains power from the engine crankshaft, and it will transfer to the gearbox, which means transaxle or transmission. It allows the driver to control the power flow between the engine and the transmission or transaxle by F and R arrangement, which is front engine front wheel drive for transaxle, and for transmission vehicle it uses for front engine rear wheel drive arrangement. Also, it used in engineering to engage smoothly two shafts in relative motion, one of which may be stationary, and to release them quickly or slowly, we'll be using different optional mechanisms or types, which means we have different types of clutch mechanism, but the end target is the used as power transmitting device intermittently as required. Obviously, when we come to the specifically to the vehicle system clutch, this clutch has four functions. The first function will be performed, or the first two functions will be performed when the clutch is disengaged or when the pedal is depressed by the driver, as you observe in the picture. The two parts will be separated, which means the crankshaft or which means the engine side and the gearbox side will be separated. So it allows smooth and free engine cranking, which means, as I described in the previous video, it reduces the resistance on the starter motors. Also, it permits to engine run freely without delivering power to the transmission, even if we select first, second, third, or reverse gear, including all gears of the vehicle. Again, it permits the driver to shift at a time in different gears, which means that's why always the driver will be depress the clutch pedal. They make the power interrupted, and after that they can select the preferred gear. While engaged, or when the clutch pedal is moved up, as you observe in the second picture, the clutch will initially slip momentarily, which allows or which provides smooth engagement between the gearbox and the engine, because one part will be stationary and the other will be rotary. So when this rotary and stationary part engage, if they are not engaged slowly or smoothly, it will create torsional stress and it will damage some shafts, gears of the drivetrain system, and it disturbs the passengers or the goods on the vehicle. So in the next part, which means the first will we say this one balancing, it assists for balancing when we release slowly, and the next one when the clutch pedal is when the clutch pedal is fully released, or if it's released or going up, it allows the engagement of engine to the transmission, and the engine can transmit power one-to-one from engine to transmission. After that, the transmission will be reduce or upgrade the speed and the torque by its mechanism, gear mechanism. So when you see the clutch, as you obviously know, the engine will be at the front and the clutch is the intermediator between the gearbox and the engine. So if the engine is running and if the driver wants to stop the vehicle, which means that the pedal will be go down and it will create open here. So if it is open, the power anymore cannot transmit it to the gearbox. Again, in the second part, when the driver release, it will create smooth engagement between the rotating engine and the stationary vehicle or gearbox. So it allows smooth engagement. That's why we use for different purpose when we press the pedal and release the pedal. When you see the manual clutch construction and operation for the light duty vehicle, uh, clutch is constructed from the basic part and the clutch release mechanism, because it will have two basic things. The first one is which allows if you consider the engine flywheel, friction disc, pressure plate assembly, these are, we call this one main parts of the clutch, because these parts are the pressure plate, the disc, and the flywheel are responsible for the clamping force, which means they are responsible for transmitting power from the engine to the transmission, and the transmission ability will be determined by these three component condition specifically. But the next component, the clutch release mechanism, is it allows which works inversely with these three parts. These three parts create some clamping force and it allows the transmission of power. But the release mechanism or clutch release mechanism is used for disengagement. Mostly the force of disengagement is come from the driver. So we will have two separate basic parts here. When you see how the power will be transmitted or how the clamping force is performed, if you observe here, the pressure plate will have spring, and this spring is responsible to create the clamping force by pushing this pressure plate against the flywheel. So the flywheel is stationary from the engine. So this will be the source, of the pressure plate assembly will be the source of the pressure, and specifically the spring, the diaphragm or the coil spring is responsible for this part. So the source of power is always from the engine, which is the flywheel, and the pressure plate assembly will be bolted with the crankshaft, because the pressure plate assembly bolted to the flywheel is bolted to the crankshaft. And the power is always transferred to the transmission by means of input shaft. So this is how the clutch will be constructed. So if you observe the clutch disc or the driven member, it will not have any connection by means of shaft with the pressure plate assembly or flywheel. It will only connected by means of frictional force. When you see the components of clutch system, the first one is the flywheel. So the flywheel is the mounting surface for the clutch. So as you observe here, the flywheel one side will be very smooth to create some frictional force with the pressure plate, I mean the friction disc. So it will be smooth, and it is really precisely machined to prevent the wear of the flywheel. I mean the friction disc, sorry. This flywheel will be have some types. In some case, it will solid, and on latest vehicles is dual mass flywheel. When you say dual mass flywheel, it have some improvement than this solid type flywheel. As you observe this one, internally the flywheel will be separated into two parts, and internally it will have springs. These springs allows smooth transmission of torque, or it reduces torsional stress which pass from the engine to the gearbox, or from the gearbox to the engine. Mostly the engine operation will be have not smooth, so this allows to transfer smooth torque from the engine to the transmission by these springs. As we know, spring will absorb some sudden motion of the torsional force. The clutch disc is another component. So obviously the center plate of the clutch disc is as obvious. It's a driven member, and it's the sandwich between the flywheel and the pressure plate assembly, and the sandwiching forces came from obviously from the spring of the pressure plate assembly. So it will have some, or it consists of a splined hub. This splined hub will be connected with input shaft to transmit power. And obviously it will have a round metal plate which is covered with the frictional material. Most of the time this frictional material is made from asbestos, because this asbestos mostly it applies in vehicle in more frictional part like clutch system, brake system, because it's really high resistance material, and the coefficient of friction is better because the friction, uh, if the friction increases, the power transmission ability also increase here. So the clutch disc specifically is composed of, it will have clutch disc torsion spring, the clutch disc facing spring or cushion spring, the hub, and the clutch disc frictional material or lining. So the clutch disc torsional spring will reduce, like the dual mass flywheel it's initially made, or reduce the torsional stress which come from the engine to the transmission or gearbox. So it will have some resistance for torsional force, or it will absorb torsional force which harms the gearbox. And the clutch disc facing spring or cushion spring, it allows the smooth engagement between the uh, flywheel and pressure plate assembly when the clutch is engaged and disengaged when the driver depress and release the clutch pedal. Also, the hub will have this assembly, or it will integrate the lining part and the clutch disc, I mean the center, the spline part, it will integrate both parts by means of rivet. The clutch disc friction material or asbestos lining, or in some case, it uses centered metal clutch linings, which is a frictional surface which will have direct contact with the flywheel and the pressure plate assembly. So if you see the clutch disc construction, it will have some friction material, or it will have lining over here which is riveted by means of rivets, and it will have torsional spring as you observe here. This torsional coil spring prevents torsional stress or the torsional force which will be directly transmitted from the engine to the gearbox. So it resists sudden twisting of parts by absorbing this force by means of spring. And also if you see this cushion spring, or this spring, it seems, or it seems S. So this S indicates, or the wave indicates, reduces the probability of sudden engagement or noise when the clutch pedal is released and depressed. Let me show you one video which will be integrated with this part. As you see, this one shows us the torsional spring. It reduces the torsional stress, or it allows the movement, and this one shows the cushion spring. So the cushion spring allows the smooth engagement between the pressure plate assembly and the pressure plate assembly and the flywheel, when it engage and disengage. Also, the torsional spring will allows reduce the torsional stress of the part totally. By combining both, they will create a smooth rotation of the parts, or a smooth engagement disengagement of uh, engine and traction. So this is what the clutch will be performing. If we see the summary of this part, as obviously the clutch is the first drivetrain component powered by the engine crankshaft, and this clutch will allows the engine cranking, or permit when running freely by disconnecting from the gear when the pedal is depressed by the driver. That means if the driver depresses the clutch pedal, it allows easy or free cranking, or it runs freely even if we select the gear. Sometimes what will happen in real condition, when we forget to depress the clutch pedal and apply the brake, if the drivetrain or the gearbox is on first gear or second gear, the engine will be automatically off. That means if we depress the clutch pedal, the engine can be freely move, and the gearbox side will be stationary by means of brake system. Again, the clutch will allows or provides smooth engagement. That means initially when we balance the vehicle, it will create some smooth engagement and transmit power when the pedal is released. Uh, and the clutch will have a basic part to create clamping and frictional force. These basic parts are the flywheel, friction disc, and pressure plate assembly. And also it will have release mechanism which facilitates the disengagement of the engine from the transmission, which is operated by the driver or the clutch pedal. And these clutch discs are composed of different parts to make smooth engagement and to reduce torsional stress. Uh, to create smooth engagement, it uses cushion spring, and on the other hand, to reduce torsional stress, they will use torsional spring. And for the better frictional surface, they use have centered or asbestos type lining, and this lining is riveted with the steel plate by means of rivet. So that is the clutch function. So thank you for your attention. As always, if you have any comment, you can address, or you can use these contacts, and I'm ready to answer your question. Thank you. Have a nice time.